This Italian snippet deals with the imperfect, particularly the translation of the Italian imperfetto into various tenses in English. We have already looked at how the imperfect tense in Italian is formed and what it generally means, so now we can take a closer look at the best way to translate the imperfect into English. In particular, we'll examine the reasons why, although the past continuous may be used in some instances to translate the imperfect in Italian, the English simple past tense is actually the most frequently used translation in English. When two or more descriptive actions occur at the same time, the imperfect must be used in Italian. In these instances, the imperfetto is generally translated by the past continuous tense in English. For example, io dormivo e Luigi studiava. Two uses of the imperfetto in Italian that require a continuous tense in English to really make sense. I was sleeping and Luigi was studying. Mentre noi cantavamo, voi giocavate. While we were singing, you all were playing. Tu dormivi, Anna studiava e io cucinavo. You were sleeping, Anna was studying, and I was cooking. Descriptive actions in the past tense. In fact, you need these two types of translations, the past continuous and the simple past, to make distinctions in English as well as in Italian. You can compare these two sentences. Ieri alle 7 Raffaella scriveva una lettera. Yesterday at 7 Raffaella was writing a letter. This sentence in Italian as well as English focuses on the duration of the activity. You want to describe an action that is unfolding in the past. On the other hand, you have in Italian, ieri alle 7 Raffaella ha scritto una lettera. This use of the passato prossimo in Italian should be translated by the simple past in English. Yesterday at 7, Raffaella wrote a letter. This particular sentence stresses the completion of the action. Obviously, she didn't write it all exactly at 7 o'clock on the dot, but right around 7 o'clock she started writing and she completed writing the letter. So there are plenty of instances when the past continuous is truly the best translation in English. For these types, think of descriptive, scene-setting passages, such as the following. Yesterday, I was sitting in the park. The birds were singing, and the butterflies were flittering among the flowers. The air smelled fresh and wonderful. I was watching the people walk by, and everyone seemed happy. It was such a beautiful day. What we have in this descriptive paragraph is a bunch of actions that take place in the past. I'm trying to paint a scene for you. So I say, I was sitting, the birds were singing, the butterflies were fluttering, I was watching. On the other hand, in the exact same paragraph, you do have verbs that occur in the simple past. The air smelled fresh, everyone seemed happy, it was such a beautiful day. This use of the past tense here is not so much based on the descriptive quality of the passage, but rather the particular verbs that are being employed in English. In fact, verbs of condition, thinking, perception, sensory experience, desire, and others generally occur in the Italian imperfetto. In fact, that's the tense you'll most commonly see them in Italian. But on the other hand, these same verbs almost always use non-continuous tenses in English. For example, sempre credevano tutto. Here, the verb credere is in the Italian imperfect, but in English, of course, we would just say they always believed everything. The idea is that with the verb to believe, it doesn't usually make sense to say were believing or am believing. For example, you wouldn't say they were believing in God or they are believing in God. It's the same whether it's the present or a past tense in English. With this type of verb of cognition, we really just prefer the simple form. Volevamo andare in Italia. We wanted to go to Italy. It's the same thing for verbs of desire. Would sound funny to say we were wanting to go to Italy. Anni fa preferivo il mare alla montagna. Years ago, I preferred the sea to the mountains. Doesn't make sense to use a continuous tense. I nostri nonni sapevano sempre ciò che pensavamo. Our grandparents always knew what we were thinking. Here, actually, the second verb should be considered more of an action in the past tense, but the idea of knowing would occur in a simple tense. In translation in English, you wouldn't say our grandparents were knowing, or even our grandparents are knowing. Le strade erano larghe. The roads were wide. Faceva bel tempo. It was beautiful weather out. Tua nonna era generosa. Your grandmother was generous. Quanti anni avevo tuo nonno? How old was your grandfather? And che ora era? Erano le 9:30. What time was it? It was 9:30. Likewise, English adverbs express the continuousness of the past action, and so English translations generally use the simple past rather than the past continuous to express repetition or duration through a verb. For example, andavano alla spiaggia ogni giorno. Here you have the verb andare in the imperfect with a time cue that suggests repeated action. Ogni giorno, every day. So in English, we would just say they went to the beach every day. It would sound funny maybe to say they were going to the beach every day, although you might be able to use that technically on a stylistic basis or colloquial basis. But really, this use of the imperfetto is required in Italian, whereas in English it's almost exactly the opposite. Quando ero piccolo, visitavo I miei nonni frequentemente. When I was young, I visited my grandparents frequently. Again, it is the adverb alone that allows the English speaker to understand it was a repeated action, and we don't need the verb to do that, although the verbs in Italian must comply to this repetition in the past. Mio zio parlava sempre in inglese. My uncle always spoke in English. The always is the word that suggests the repetition, and in English we just use the simple past. I miei amici e io giocavamo spesso tutto il pomeriggio. My friends and I often played all afternoon. So here again, you have the time cue. Often in English, you don't need any verb to express the repetition or continuation of that action. In sentences with both an imperfetto and passato prossimo, or other past tense verbs such as the passato remoto in Italian, the imperfetto generally describes an incomplete or interrupted action, and the past continuous is likewise used in English to differentiate between the ongoing and the interrupted. For example, quando ho visto Luca, lui parlava. What was the ongoing action? He was speaking. What was the thing that came along and interrupted that ongoing action? My seeing him. So you'd have to translate it as, When I saw Luca, he was speaking. The discrete action being in the simple past, I saw, and the ongoing action being in the imperfect in Italian, but in the past continuous tense in English. Aveva una fretta quando l'ho visto. He was in a hurry when I saw him. Again, the thing that was ongoing and ultimately interrupted was the fact of him being in a hurry. Again, I saw him was the discrete interrupting action. Noi guardavamo la televisione quando lei ha telefonato. We were watching the television or TV when she called. So again, our watching the TV was the ongoing thing when someone called and interrupted. Ero occupato quando tu sei arrivato. I was busy when you arrived. Note the use, of course, of the verb essere as the auxiliary for intransitive verbs in the Italian passato prossimo, and the use of the imperfect of essere just for ongoing actions, whereas we almost always use the simple past, I was, you were, etc. in English. So I was busy when you arrived, and that one is a little different precisely because the interrupted action won't be styled as I was being busy. That's one of those verbs mentioned above that really sounds weird so in a continuous tense, so even when it's an interrupted action, in that case we have to just put it into the simple past, and we have two simple past verbs. Again, I was busy when you arrived. We have already seen da used with the present tense to express the perfect progressive in English. For example, studio italiano da 2 anni. I have been studying Italian for 2 years. So here you see the studio, the present tense verb in Italian, being translated by the perfect progressive have been studying in English. So when da is used in the imperfect in Italian, it expresses the pluperfect progressive in English. For example, Vincenzo era alla spiaggia da 2 settimane. Vincenzo had been at the beach for 2 weeks. Remember that the verb to be is the great exception to the use of the continuous tense, I want to say, in English, so you wouldn't say had been being. It's very rare to use the verb to be in English with any continuous form, although essere almost always well, I shouldn't say almost always, but very commonly uses the imperfetto form in Italian because it is a descriptive verb. Pioveva da 3 giorni. It had been raining for 3 days. Again, we just have a simple imperfective tense in Italian, but followed by the da. We can no longer translate it as a simple past or as a past continuous. We have to put it into this pluperfect continuous tense. It had been raining. Lavoravo in quell'edificio da molti anni. The lavoravo is translated by had been working, so you get I had been working in that building for many years.